Okay, we'll come back to that. In the last video, we had a pretty rough time getting this tail light panel installed in the Impala. And we had to end up cutting it into two pieces. Yeah, remember that piece? Well, we're going to get that installed, finished out. Okay, so the reason we had to cut it in two pieces, you can see how well the fit is. Yeah, curvature's all wrong. The piece is really, it's just a bad stamping. And unfortunately, that's going around. A lot of bad, ill-fitting stampings. Okay, so I've already installed this piece, but I had to cut this piece up again. Here's a shot of the major piece welded in. And we had to cut that piece up, like I said, again. So we're going to go ahead and dress this down and finish this off. What we'll have to do is move that piece down to match the curvature of the trunk gutter. Okay, first things first. Now we don't want to go below flush or dig a trough into the metal. First we started with the grinding wheel. Now we're coming back with a flat disc. And we're finishing off with a different type, finer grit flat disc. Yeah, we're just going to have to piece this thing together. And unfortunately, the passenger side is probably worse than the driver's side. But that's another video. Okay, there's where we're at now. And we're going to finish this thing off with some 80 grit on a little mini DA. And there it is. Pretty happy with that. Okay. Like I mentioned, we're going to have to move this piece down to match the curvature of the trunk gutter. We know that the trunk gutter, that's a factory piece. We know that piece is formed correctly. So we're going to have to match it. Yeah, and this whole thing started because the deck lid, the quarter panel, and the taillight panel, well, they're not made, or they're not formed just right. So yeah, we have a ton of extra work to do here. I would much rather it just fit and move on, but you know, what are you going to do? Okay, so we're getting this piece fitted, held into place in the correct position. We got our tack welds. Now we can take off and get this piece welded. And if you'll notice, it depends on where you cut a piece. You can make life a lot easier for yourself, or you can make life more difficult for yourself. Cutting it in this way, positioning it, re-welding it, that's going to be the optimal place where we're going to get the best weld, and it's going to be the least amount of cleanup. Shooting for metal finish or near metal finish. I think once this joint is done, we could probably use a couple of really heavy coats of high build primer. Okay, carefully. Just staying on top of the weld. We don't want to get into the sides because then we're going to grind the metal too thin, and then that's going to create problems. Don't want that. We've had enough problems. And you can see by the sparks coming off and the noise, I'm not bearing down on this thing. And it's all a progression. This is called dressing down the welds. Now we're switching over to a flat disc, just dressing it down a little bit further. Now you can see where we moved that piece down. Well, we have that gap there. We're going to take care of that. Okay, this thing's coming along. And there it is. That's really important. We haven't welded that piece yet. That's going to come later. And we still have a considerable amount of work to do to this area. Okay, so we're going to address that little patch panel now. Now we're just going to start with some paper stock, cut that down to size. What we're doing here is we are making a template so that we can transfer it to metal, sheet metal, get the correct dimensions and size and everything. This is just the rough end, making it slightly larger out of heavy duty construction paper. Now this point's really critical because we can't just take it over to the vise and bend a straight line or our lines aren't going to match up. This is actually a compound curve here, so we want to keep that in mind. Okay, so we have our first bend line. Cutting it down to size. And hey, if it's not going right, just it's easier to remake a template at this point than to start rebending metal. Okay, now we're going to use that template to transfer to the sheet metal so we can fabricate that little piece. And we can fold that up and get the correct angle of bend. And whenever we're bending stuff like this, we don't want to make a hard 90-degree bend. We want kind of a softer bend because the lines on this car, they're not hard breaks. So that's another consideration to keep in mind. Okay, now I've already cut it out, bent it, and I put a punched a hole there for a plug weld so we can attach that to the trunk gutter at a later time. Okay, now we just want to get it in position. Now, like I mentioned, that piece is oversized. Yeah, we could just put that in there and start welding, but that's not what we're going to do, because then that would require filler. The less filler we put into the car, the better. Like I mentioned in other videos, nothing wrong with a little bit of filler as long as it's done right. Okay, so now I'm using this tool, and we have our line scribed. Of our actual size that we need, and we're going to carefully cut that out. Cleaning up the back side a little bit. Okay, let's see what we've done. I think we can use that. Okay, I'm going to use a magnet to hold this. It's kind of tricky because you can't really hold it from the backside very well. We're going to hold it with the magnet and see if we can get lucky here. Okay, we got our first tack. It's in the correct position. Okay, taking our time to make sure everything is in the correct position before we go any further. We want this to be flush with the parent piece. looking good. So we can go ahead and finish out welding. Usually you don't want to weld too quickly, but because there's so many bends in this area, we don't really have to worry about warpage. You still don't want to go too fast. But just in case anybody's wondering, hey, you're going welding pretty fast, you can in certain situations. You don't want to do that out in the middle of a panel for sure, or installing a quarter panel or something. Okay, same procedure. Dress it down gradually, paying a lot of attention so that we don't make it too thin. And that was a tool sent to us. Thanks, Milton. And keep in mind, this is a weather strip channel, the trunk gutter. So this is all going to be covered up, this area where you see these cuts and the plug well holes. So that part will never be visible, and it's going to be finished out later. Okay, there's what we have. Now, anytime that you have any type of metal work done, you always want to check it. Okay, you can see we still have our play there. This is how we're going to check it. Whether you do the work or anybody does the work, don't go on to the next step unless this is done. This is what we're doing at the front of the video. And now you can see I'm hitting that that's getting a pretty good lick there. What we're checking for is if we punch through, we know we have welded that, ground that, and it's too thin. Another indication, if you ever see if you're grinding and you see a blue ring or a blue area, that means the metal is really thin. Now this is where in the last video we had welded. Now you'll see some little pits. Okay, that was in the welding process. Those aren't holes. Those are just what that is caused by is probably that area had some overlapping welds, trapped a little bit of impurities, and didn't get a really solid weld. That is of no consequence. It's not going to affect anything. A slight amount of filler or a few heavy coats of high build primer will take care of those. Okay, so we have all that checked. Here's what we've done. Really happy. Stay tuned for the next video. As always, thank you for watching.